Oh, hey, didn't notice you there. They tell me you want to learn about synthesizers. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with just what exactly is a synthesizer. So when a lot of people think about synthesizers, the first thing that comes to mind is a keyboard. Something like this, some electrical doodad that makes a bunch of sounds. What I've got in front of me is just a regular MIDI keyboard, and this doesn't make any sound by itself. All this does is send note information about what I'm playing to the computer, and it can sound like anything. Just like a piano, it can sound like an organ. Creepy stuff. Or it can sound much more complicated. If you want to stay in the creepy area, we are coming up on Halloween. But in this case, I have some synthesizers running on my computer. And so that, it's just a digital synthesizer. Synthesizers come in many different forms. So back here, I've got an analog synthesizer, which doesn't use a computer. It uses entirely electronic circuits in order to make the sounds that it makes. And this is actually how a lot of synthesizers were created in the beginning. They can also take different forms, such as a drum machine. This drum machine in particular is also an analog drum machine. And so all the sounds that it makes is entirely using electronics. So how does a synthesizer work? Well, there's actually a number of really well-known components that even in digital synthesizers are pretty much exactly the same as the original synthesizers. And to break them down into what are known as modules, a term you may have heard is modular synthesizers. So we're going to start with the most basic component, something that makes sound. And in this case, we're going to start with what's known as an oscillator. The most basic tone that an oscillator can make is a sine wave. And so it's using the wave shape that's coming from a power source to drive speakers, and that's how it generates the sound. And so with a sine wave, it's a simple, up and down oscillation. Sounds very chill, very simple. And if you take a look at the spectrum, you'll see that it's a very simple spectrum. You really have one spike, which is known as the fundamental harmonic. Very nice. If you switch over to some of the other wave shapes, such as a triangle wave, it's still pretty chill, but it has a little bit more bite to it. And looking at the spectrum, you can see that there's a lot more harmonics being generated. And once you start moving into things like the square wave, which is really just a fast on-off oscillation, you see that it's a pretty harsh tone. But these harsh tones were pretty much everything all that early video games had to work with, for example. So the early video game systems actually had synthesizer chips on board that could generate a lot of these tones and be controlled by computer code. And so, you've got, if you look at the original Pong game, that's actually just using a square wave, and when it bounces off the wall, it just... So it's really the same note, just one octave apart. And the same is true for other video gaming systems. So for example, the Nintendo Entertainment System also had a synthesizer chip, and they really made some amazing sound come from those chips. One of the other tools that a synthesizer can use to shape the way it sounds, or the timbre, is something called a filter. And so a filter, if you look at just a simple note, you'll see that it's making all of this, sound across the frequency spectrum. But with a filter, you can start taking away certain frequencies to make it sound different. And then depending on how you shape that filter, you can do different things. Like, for example, if you raise the resonance, which adds a little peak right at the cutoff, you can get weird sounds like this. And especially if you move it around, you get really cool sounds.